Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, President Trump starts his second term at the White House, taking sweeping action on immigration, the impacts those presidential orders could have on Iowa. And by a stroke of his pen, the president frees more than 1,000 people found guilty for their actions during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The rioters from Iowa cleared in that mass pardon. And in a one-on-one interview with the Iowa Democratic Party chair, we ask her about her work as Republicans now hold even more of a majority at the Iowa State House, which she says she's focused on to change things in 2026.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. President Donald Trump wrapped up his first week back in the Oval Office. He was sworn in last Monday before signing a flurry of executive actions.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully
Trump promised a, quote, revolution of common sense during his 30-minute inaugural address. He outlined sweeping policy priorities. Many of his executive actions undo former President Joe Biden's policies, who officially left the White House Monday after the peaceful transfer of power. Trump signed several executive orders relating to immigration. One would end birthright citizenship, a right outlined in the U.S. Constitution. The president acknowledged that the order is already prompting legal challenges.
And it's just absolutely ridiculous, but, we'll see. We have very good grounds.
Trump also issued immigration orders that would pause refugee resettlements, send military troops to the border, reverse the Biden administration's narrow deportation criteria, and pursue undocumented immigrants. Days before Trump was sworn in, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds ordered the Iowa Department of Public Safety and the State Department of Corrections to help implement federal immigration laws. Reynolds had previously said Iowa is willing and ready to use the state's National Guard and law enforcement to back Trump's policies. When I sat down with the governor a few weeks ago, I asked her how that would work. She told me she'll follow Trump's instructions.
President Trump is going to take the lead on that, so he's going to talk about what his plan looks like, and then, we've got states that are ready to help him implement it based on what his recommendations are.
Late last week, news tips were pouring into KCCI about multiple arrests by immigration and customs enforcement agents across the metro area. We looked into every tip we received, and the Polk County Sheriff's Office told us that concerns on multiple arrests by ICE agents at the county courthouse are not true. They did confirm that there was one arrest by agents there on Thursday morning, and the Polk County Sheriff's Office says that arrest took place in a public area, and once the ICE agents arrested the person, the Sheriff's Office say they left the courthouse. They said they do not have information about specifically why that arrest was made, but they did say they don't believe that arrest was any different than arrests ICE are usually able to make. With the state legislature back in session, some Iowa Republicans now want action to increase state immigration enforcement. In a 3-to-1 vote in Iowa and a 2-to-1 vote, an Iowa House subcommittee advanced a bill last week that would criminalize smuggling non-citizens for pay or for other benefits. It would also make it illegal to encourage someone to enter or remain in the country illegally, but opponents of the bill say it could come with unintended consequences and pose humanitarian concerns. They say the bill does not distinguish between different types of non-citizens, which means it would apply to anyone who entered the country illegally, but also anyone who's overstayed their visa or lawful permanent residence.
In a plain reading of this law, it would apply, of course, to the coyote who is smuggling people for profit, but it would also apply to a bus driver who's driving kids to CCD or to church with no knowledge that they may have overstayed their visa through no intention of their own. That's a significant issue.
Republican Representative Stephen Holt, who introduced the bill, says he's open to changing its wording, but says he believes it's necessary to protect the people of Iowa.
I think Iowa is welcoming for legal immigrants, and I don't intend for us to be welcoming to violators of the law and to illegal aliens. We will be unwelcoming in that regard because we need to stand up for the rule of law.
The same bill passed through the Iowa House last year, but did not have enough support in the Senate. That would need to change for it to pass this year. Well, I'm joined now by Jody Mashik, the co-legal director of the Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Well, there's a lot at play here at the federal level, at the state level. First, tell me a little bit about your organization, what the goals are, and what you do.
So at Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice, we have two major program areas. One is that we provide direct immigration legal services, and the other one is our organizing and advocacy program. So we have a robust immigration legal services program. We serve immigrants throughout the state of Iowa. And we do that because we believe it is necessary to be able to provide address urgent needs of immigrants in our communities. Although immigration and legal processes can take a long time, we want to be able to assist people with those. But we also know that we need to work for systemic change. And so that's why we think that both parts of the program are incredibly important. We want to be able to advocate on behalf of and with immigrants in our communities, organize on their behalf and with them to try to create a welcoming Iowa for everyone.
We know that there has been a lot of action in a short period of time from the Trump administration on immigration. How are you looking at those executive orders, watching them and interpreting them?
Well, it's a lot coming down the pipeline at a really fast pace, so we're trying to keep up with it. We knew this was going to happen. So on a broader scale, we've been preparing since last year. We were unprepared under the previous Trump administration, but we had a better idea of what to expect this time around if he was elected president again. So we've been preparing on a broader scale in terms of getting support teams in Polk County and throughout the state in terms of like when there are deportations or when a family member is taken away. What is that going to look like for the rest of the family? What if both parents are not there? So we're doing some of that large-scale planning throughout the state, having emergency response teams with a lot of different committees. But in terms of the actual executive orders themselves, we have to take a look at every single one of them. And there have been, I'm not sure that, I think I've lost count already this week alone. And we have to look at them and see how is this going to affect our clients? How are these going to affect the members of our communities? What steps can we take? What do we need to be letting our clients know and our immigrant neighbors at large? So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned this is something that you have been preparing for. Is there any of those executive orders that you read that surprised you a little bit, or will open up something different than what you were expecting?
I don't want to say surprised. Not surprised. You kind of knew it was coming. It was almost sort of a wait and see how many things are going to come down the pipeline. So I think we learned a lot under the previous Trump administration that we can expect a lot of really terrible things, and that's happening. So disappointment for sure. Not surprise necessarily, but a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration.
We know Trump on the campaign trail had been promising to carry out mass deportations, he said, unlike the country has ever seen. Now that he's in office, do you have any indication of what that potentially could look like in Iowa? What state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, ICE agents, what they're allowed to do and not?
Well, it's always hard to figure out. We have an idea based on the previous Trump administration where we did see a huge uptick in ICE detaining people at gas stations, at restaurants, just out in the community. This involved a lot of just walking up to people. Frequently ICE agents are in civilian clothing, unmarked vehicles, and that was one of the big things that happened. Just a huge uptick in ICE detaining people under the previous administration. And that is why there is such a flurry to help people understand what their rights are. And that's true of anybody, whether you are an immigrant to this country or you were born here. Understand what your rights are when you are interacting with the police, with an ICE agent. Everybody does have rights. So we've been working pretty hard for quite a while now on Know Your Rights trainings, doing them bilingually, in person, online, and I think you'll see that throughout the country too. There's a big push for people to know what their rights are when interacting with law enforcement or with ICE agents as well. So that's one of the things we've really been focused on because we know what that was like before.
What are those rights when you go through that training? What are you informing people about?
So we are trying to explain to people what are they allowed to say, when can they maintain silence? If somebody shows up at your door, what does a warrant look like? What is not a warrant? So kind of just trying to go over some of those basics, knowing what documentation looks like. Do you have to respond to a question? Basic things that we should all have an understanding of, but we try to just review those over and over and make sure people have materials. They can carry little cards with them and their language that explain those rights if they can't remember in the moment. So we've been trying to really reinforce those.
You've heard Republicans in the Trump administration say this is a public safety issue and this is about making the country more safe. As someone who works with immigrant populations, what's your response to that argument of what we're doing is making Iowa safer?
There is plenty of data available over long periods of time and in big communities, small communities that show that an increase in an immigrant population does not lead to an increase in crime. And that is true across the board. There is plenty of data available that shows that. So it's simply not true that an increase in immigration leads to an increase in crime. I think everybody agrees we want safe communities, and the immigrants that we work with also want that. They want to be able to many are seeking terrible situations and just want to be able to live in peace and just raise their families, work, pay their taxes, the same things that most of us also want. But instead, they're being scapegoated when they actually haven't done anything, have not committed crimes. So it's just this idea that we're not safe is just a myth that continues to get perpetuated when we have so much evidence to the contrary. And that's why we are striving so hard to show that Iowa is welcoming, because we rely on immigrants in this state. We rely on immigrant labor. We know that we need them to do jobs, especially in the agricultural industry, and we want Iowa to be welcoming for them. We actually need them here.
Well, Jody, I appreciate you making time to be with us this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come on Close Up, in another day one executive order signing, President Donald Trump pardoned thousands or more than 1,000 people convicted in the January 6th attack. We show you the Iowans who were released from prison after the presidential pardon. Welcome back to Close Up. Two Iowans who were convicted for their actions during the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol are now out of prison after being pardoned by President Trump last Monday. Salvador Sandoval of Ankeny and Kyle Young of Redfield are two of the 9 Iowans who received pardons. Both Young and Sandoval had been sentenced to serve at least 7 months in federal prison. Without the pardon, they would not have at least 7 years. At least 86 months. They would not have been released until 2028. University of Iowa law professor Andy Graywall says the pardon essentially wipes away their conviction.
If they're filling out a job application and asked, have you ever been convicted of a crime? I suppose they can say no. Everyone may know that it happened, but that conviction has been erased.
Sandoval's attorneys tell KCCI they spoke with Salvador after his release. Young's wife posted on his online fundraising page that she waited outside the prison for 3 hours for her husband before he was released last week. Up next on Close Up, Ophelia Jacobson joins us for a one-on-one conversation with the Iowa Democratic Party chair, what she has to say about the November election results and why she's already focused on the next election.
Welcome back to Close Up. Rita Hart was reelected to lead the Iowa Democratic Party for a second term. Her reelection comes just 2 months after Republicans expanded their majorities in the Iowa legislature, and Iowa's 6 electoral votes went to President Donald Trump in the November election. In a statement, Hart admitted the 2024 election did not go how I nor any Democrat in Iowa wanted. And we are joined this morning by Chair Rita Hart. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Ophelia. I'm glad to be here.
We'll just start off by reflecting on the 2024 election. What do you think went wrong and what do you think went right?
Yeah, that was a tough election for us as Democrats. And so, you know what I told reporters before the election happened is that I thought we had already achieved some success in the Democratic Party, no matter what the turnout was in the election results. Because we have struggled as a party way back, I think, starting in 2010. And in 2022, we had a very tough election. And so when I started as chair, we knew then that it was going to take several cycles for us to come back out of that. And so what we've been able to accomplish over the last 2 years has been very rewarding. We know that we have built a foundation that we can now build on, and that we have great hope that we are expanding our party's base. We have improved our infrastructure. We have stepped up our game financially. These are the things that are going to be long-range changes for the Iowa Democrats that are really going to reap rewards coming in the elections ahead.
What do you think you guys can improve on going forward to the next election?
So yeah, we're already at work. I mean, I think that's the good news about being reelected and getting us started already here at the beginning of January. We know that we've got to continue to expand our base to talk about what Democrats stand for and get people to understand that we are working for the people who are trying to pay their bills, trying to support their families, trying to improve their lives, and that we are listening to the things that are actually going to make a difference in their lives. So we're doing the ordinary kinds of things that a political party has to do in working with our county parties and improving our structure and doing the outreach that it takes to build the party from the ground up.
And to that point, you published an 18-page document laying out your vision for 2026, how you're going to accomplish those goals. Any specific key points that you want to mention from that plan?
You know, this isn't rocket science. You know, we know that there are certain things that we have to do in order to do a good job of listening to the voters and responding to their needs. We're looking forward to 2026. It's going to be a great opportunity for us. You know, we've got some really important races. You know, we've got a governor race on the ticket in 26. We have a U.S. Senate race. We have 4 congressional races, and 2 of them already we know are going to be a couple of the most competitive in the country. And of course, we have all our House and Senate seats and the across the ticket positions that people are going to be running for. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're happy that we're able to get going right away.
We are in the middle of the legislative session, and House Minority Leader Jennifer Confirst and Senate Democratic Leader Janice Weiner have endorsed that plan that you released. What have your conversations been with them like, and how are you supporting their work over at the State House?
Oh, absolutely. It goes hand in hand, right? The work that takes place in that legislature is responding to the needs of Iowans, right? And so Democrats are really focused in on improving those people's lives. And so we know that people are not happy with the results of what's happening under the Reynolds administration right now, that rural Iowa particularly is struggling to survive, that our population is shifting from the rural areas to the urban areas, that people are still struggling to find affordable child care, to have grocery stores in their neighborhoods, to have good nursing homes in the areas that they live. Our county parties, our counties and our local supervisors are talking about how this administration has managed to make their lives harder in providing the many services that people who live all across the state need to be taking place. And so I work hand in hand with Senator Weiner and Representative Confirst to make sure that we are together and the messaging that we need to get across to the folks who live across this state and are counting on us to get good returns for them.
And looking ahead to 2028, what are Democrats' plan to kind of head into those caucuses? Do you have any details that you can share with us right now?
Yeah, I guess I'm laughing because there's always a question about the caucuses.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're having some really interesting conversations right now because we have an election going on with our choosing a new DNC chair, and I think that chair position is crucial on what happens with the calendar. And so what I can tell you is that our conversations with those folks has really focused in on making sure that the process is an open one, it's a transparent one, and that everyone's on the same level starting off. I do think, I will repeat that I think that the DNC made a mistake by not including a state like Iowa in the first running, and that hurt us as a party. And so we're having those conversations and making sure that we have our conversations with all the Democrats across the state. I said 2 years ago that we were going to have a family conversation at this time, and that's what we are doing now to make sure that we are that whatever happens, that Iowa Democrats are together on what we'd like to see happen as far as the caucuses are concerned.
Will you be fighting for that first in the nation spot?
Well, certainly, again, this is going to be part of the conversation, you know, that we've got to do what's best for Iowa. And we certainly are going to be talking about what other people think, what other Democrats think about how that pans out. But we're going to see who we end up with for a DNC chair. I think that has a lot to do with what's going to take place in 2028.
And last question for you. We just saw President Donald Trump take the oath of office, and Governor Kim Reynolds has repeatedly, you know, I feel like sided with some of his policies. We saw a DOJ created here in the state of Iowa that kind of mirrored what happened on the federal level. She sent out a memo, you know, telling law enforcement to help enforce those federal immigration laws. When you have a governor who is so supportive of the president, how do Democrats manage that here in the state?
Well, again, you know, I think that we got to keep what's good for the people in mind first, right? Everybody has an interest in government working well for them, and that it be efficient. And so Democrats are supportive of that. Now, I think it's really interesting that right away after the election, the word has come down that, well, it's really hard to make the kinds of cuts that are really going to make a difference. And so we'll see, you know, how that pans out as far as what actions they actually take, and does that really make a difference. I would tell you that it's hard to watch the inauguration and see that the emphasis has been placed on all of these tech gazillionaires that are sitting up on the stage next to President Trump, talking about what is in it for them rather than what's in it for the American people. So what Democrats are going to be focused on is that we actually deliver for the American people, that we actually do have government that works better for them and is more efficient. We're all about supporting any of those efforts.
Well, Chair Hart, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. KCCI 8 News will be right back. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.